Content warning. Paradox Live includes themes of trauma, child abuse and neglect, violence, suicide, death, human experimentation, and gang activity. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back, heads. Today we're going to get right into it, talking about the traumas of the individual characters in the first 4 units. There will be some spoilers, so if you're new to the series, just know that some character traumas are tied to important plot points in the narrative progression, such as Shiki, Kanata, and Nayuta. If you've been following along with my videos so far, or have gotten at least to the end of the anime or the live drama CD, there will be some Road to Legend spoilers specifically surrounding Ryu and some of the Akanyatsura members' traumas. With that in mind, let's proceed. I find it really fascinating on a meta level that the creators of Paradox Live were aware of the history of hip-hop as a genre that arose from Black American community, giving a voice to people who have been oppressed and persecuted. This is reflected in the series, in which the use of phantom metal to create hip-hop is inherently tied to the creators' past struggles. The theme of using hip-hop as an instrument or weapon to strike out against an oppressive society is also revisited many times, and the choice to create music as a means of speaking out is a core concept of the series. Specific examples are BAE using hip-hop to free themselves from the crushing expectations of parents and society, cozmez using hip-hop as an artistic medium to speak about their experiences growing up in abject poverty, and Gokuluk, a second-gen unit, using hip-hop to take shots at those in positions of authority. With this in mind, each character has some sort of trauma known to us that influences their music and personality, except for Yasha from Budokan. These are all alluded to through unique hashtags found on their pages on the official website, and I'll be including Jackal's English translations of them in this video. As always, Jackal's website where he's compiled all of this information will be linked in the comments below. BAE's traumas are the ones that get the most play throughout the series. We know all of the members' traumas, and even what they see and hear during their trap reactions. We don't get this for nearly any other group or characters, which is somewhat unfortunate. But that said, these are their traumas. After being raised to be a classical violinist, Alan discovered hip-hop through Budokan and suddenly felt as though he had discovered something that spoke to him on a profound level. None of the music he had studied before impacted him like hip-hop did, and he was filled with the inspiration to create his own music as a result. His parents considered hip-hop to be trashy and common, and they disapproved of this interest. They went on to burn all of Alan's albums, his track-making equipment, and everything else he owned that was related to his newfound interest in hip-hop. His feelings about hip-hop were so deep that Alan considered his parents' intolerance of the genre to be intolerance towards who he was as a person, and so he ultimately would run away from home. Either the half-blooded or adopted son of the young conglomerate, Hajun was raised for some years with the expectation of taking control of the Chaebol family's empire. When Dongha, the full-blooded son of Hajun's parents, was born, Hajun was dismissed and told that he had become unnecessary in their home and that he would be sent to Japan to build business connections there. Explored heavily through the Pride and Vibes dramas, Hajun's deep-seated fear for being dismissed as unwanted or unnecessary has led to him consistently holding others at an arm's length in fear of letting them get close enough to hurt him again. Following a divorce, Anne's mother turned her toxic attention onto her child and began forcing expectations upon them in order to win her love. These expectations demanded that Anne dress and present in a masculine style that felt stifling to them, but they complied, driven by their natural desire to be loved by their sole parent and caretaker. To those who have experienced gender dysphoria, Anne's circumstances ring familiar, specifically feeling obligated to dress or act in a certain manner to be accepted and loved, even when doing so feels like a brutal denial of one's genuine self. Beyond that lens, Anne's trauma also speaks to those with experiences of toxic family members whose love is conditional and whose happiness is made the burden of their child. Of all the original units and their respective members, no two characters' traumas are less talked about and explored than Saimon and Yohei's. They are completely excluded from the anime adaptation and frankly are only explored in any capacity in the lyrics of Mercy and in the light novel. It's a huge disservice, frankly, when their grief is a large part of the cat's Whiskers' more somber tone. 10 years before the start of the series, Simon married Tsubaki, who he considered to be his ideal woman and the love of his life. Roughly a year after they were married, Tsubaki, who had been taking part in clinical phantom metal testing, began to succumb to erosion. As her condition worsened, her memory began to fade. Eventually, she came to forget Yohei's name, and she pleaded with Simon to set her free before she forgot about him too. Devastated, but wanting to grant his beloved wife's request, Simon turned off her life support and allowed her to pass on. With Tsubaki gone, Simon told Yohei that their group, Quadra X, was disbanding, and he walked away from music and Bar 74 for a few years, choosing instead to retreat into his academia and alcoholism to cope with his loss. One day, he heard the sound of a piano playing, and following the sound, he was brought back to Bar 74, where Yohei had been waiting for him to return. When he first fell in with Simon and Tsubaki at 17, Yohei was set along the path towards creating music. Tsubaki was the one who taught him to play the piano, uncovering an unexpected talent. As he spent more time with Simon and Tsubaki, pursuing a career with Quadra X, Yohei came to fall in love with Tsubaki. He made peace with the fact that he could never truly have her, though, caring too deeply for Simon's friendship and their shared happiness to disrupt it on his own account. He also suffered from Tsubaki's passing, though, the loss of a woman that he could never have, but who he loved all the same. Though Ryu doesn't suffer from trap reactions after using his phantom metal, he does have scattered memories of being in a house with white walls and other children. As the story progresses into the road to legend, Ryu's memories are further awakened and he begins to remember having been a human experiment. At that time, Ryu formed a bond with a researcher who treated him with kindness, but this man would ultimately lose his life in a bid to help Ryu escape the facility. When he was in middle school, Shiki befriended Nayuta after encountering him in the slums. The two became close friends, and Shiki would be the only one to know about Nayuta's dangerous part-time job as a test subject. It would also be Shiki who Nayuta called when he fell victim to metal erosion and attempted to end his life as a result. Shiki was obviously deeply traumatized seeing his friend jump from the rooftop, as well as being racked with guilt due to his own hesitation and fear that left him unable to stop Nayuta. Cozmez's identity as hip-hop artists is heavily rooted in their upbringing, as the unwanted children of a teenage mother and as survivors of a brutal slum existence. The twins are heavily codependent, each prioritizing the other above their own happiness and well-being. As a result, both of their primary traumas revolve around Nayuta's circumstances. The twins grew up in squalor, bounced between a neglectful mother and an abusive facility. Eventually, they ran away from the orphanage to make their own way through life. Kanata, being healthier and older than Nayuta, assumed responsibility for them both. Nayuta became his entire world, and so he was naturally devastated to discover him lying at the foot of a building, apparently beyond saving. His horror would be so great that after losing consciousness, he would awake to a phantom metal illusion of his brother created by his subconscious in an effort to shield him from the truth. Often coddled and sheltered by his brother, Nayuta attempted to take on a part-time job to help split the responsibility of earning a living with Kanata. The onset of metal erosion led to his health drastically deteriorating, and as his condition worsened, he became terrified of becoming an even greater burden to Kanata. Suffering and in a both mentally and physically unstable state, Nayuta sought to resolve the matter by his own hand. Each of the Akanyatsura members, except for Iori, has two traumas. Zen, Hokusai Masaki, and Reo have all experienced additional hardships in their lives before finding their way to Suiseki Gumi. All of them share the raid that killed the rest of their Yakuza family as a trauma, and this shared tragedy serves as a core element to the group's formation. As previously mentioned, Iori is the sole member of the group with only one known trauma, though given that he's been involved in the Yakuza since 14, he's likely seen a lot from a young age. Above all, though, the loss of the gang's former head impacted Iori, who saw the man as a father, beyond the typical Yakuza formalities. The Yakuza, for the record, are structured like a family, in which the boss is the father, and the members are his sons, and brothers to each other. Before joining Suiseki Gumi, Zen worked as a police investigator, and his first interaction with the gang was during an undercover investigation. During this time, he came to respect the boss and the members, and was swayed by their sense of ninkyo, or Yakuza chivalry. I've said before to think of this as like a Robin Hood-esque code of ethics, legally and morally gray, but humanitarian. After this assignment, Zen made his intentions known to leave the police force. His police partner, Yuto Inukai, suffered from a psychological break triggered by this perceived betrayal and proceeded to attack Zen with such ferocity that Zen was, quote, beaten half to death. Despite efforts by Iori to suss out the perpetrator, Zen managed to keep Yuto's identity secret from him until the events of the Rage drama in Road to Legend. If you'd be interested in reading a fanfiction account of Zen's time undercover with Suiseki Gumi and the slow burn romance between himself and Iori, I would invite you to check out my fanfiction. Anyway. Hokusai's father was arrested and imprisoned for murder when Hokusai was just 3 years old. This fact would then proceed to haunt Hokusai for the rest of his childhood and adolescence, constantly poisoning the perceptions that others had of him. Unable to connect with his peers, Hokusai began to prefer animal companionship because they wouldn't shun him for being the son of a criminal. His days of loneliness and persecution by the people surrounding him ultimately would end when he was picked up by Iori at 18 years old. Satsuki's childhood was marked by behavioral and academic struggles, and his home life was strained by the time he was 11 years old. When he was 14, he was involved in a fight, and through the betrayal of a trusted friend, he ended up going to juvenile hall. When he was released at 15, he returned to his home only to find that his parents had moved and thus abandoned him. Now, in the events of the Road to Legend, it seems that this trauma has been retconned or slightly altered. In the Rage drama, Satsuki confronts Ryoga, his previously trusted friend, and asks what he's done to end up in prison. We learn that Satsuki was actually willing to take the fall for the incident that put him in juvie because he knew that Ryoga's mother cared about his well-being, unlike Satsuki's own parents, who are unconcerned with his fate. Reo initially grew up as a part of a privileged family, but his parents separated and his mother walked out when he was just 10 years old. By the time he was 12, his father had split town to avoid paying debts, leaving his young son to be hounded by loan sharks in his stead. In the anime, it's also implied that there was domestic violence involved. Following the Suiseki Gumi raid, Reo was especially affected by the presence of the media at the scene, and he reacts poorly to the reporter and news crew at Club Paradox in the introduction drama as a result. Those are all of the traumas of the first generation units, as there's still some of the second generation characters whose traumas are ambiguous, and we finally have confirmation for a fan book containing additional information about the new groups. I'll come back and make a new video once we have that. And then for real this time, I'll get to the Shuffle Team show albums in the next video, and we'll finally get to see Satsuki go on a date with Anne, which, oh my god, we all want for him. So, until that time, I'll catch you later, heads. Take care.